comes to autocross and road race cars, really the holy grail of transmissions is the sequential transmission. You see those used in everything from high-level time attack builds all the way to Formula One, and that's for good reason. They offer incredibly fast upshifts and downshifts. They're very durable under racing conditions, and you can get them with pretty much whatever gear set you want. Sounds like it's the perfect motorsport transmission, so you're probably asking yourself, Pat, this is basically a track car nowadays. Why don't you just stick a sequential in this? Well, I thought about it until you start looking into all their downsides. First off, they're incredibly expensive. You're talking $15,000 to $20,000 just for the transmission itself. That's not accounting for any electronics changes, any sensors you have to add, pretty much anything you need to actually integrate it in the car. So you can spend basically the cost of an entire car just to integrate this transmission. Second of all, they're not exactly conducive to driving on the street. Not that this car sees that much street driving, but sequentials are especially brutal on the street. Their straight cut gears and just their fundamental operation are very rough, so they're jerky, they wear down pretty quick in general, which we'll get to in a minute, but especially on the street, they just like to be driven very hard, so there's not really a way you can cruise those around. And then our third point is they go through gear sets pretty quick. In a sequential trans, you're replacing the gear set every 3,000 to 6,000 miles. It depends a little on what one you go with. And you're talking like $5,000 to $10,000 per gear set. So it's not exactly a cost-effective endeavor. Now, if only there was a transmission that gave you those upsides where you could have full manual control on track, ideally with something like paddles, and it eliminated the need for a clutch, so you could do really fast up and down shifts like a sequential. But then you could also have the street ability of something like a stick or a conventional automatic. You could turn the shift firmness down, just put it in drive, and then go cruise around. Well, there is a transmission that does all that. It's called a dual clutch transmission, and we're sticking one in the Oldsmobile. Now, sitting here in front of me is a Getrag GS7 D36 SG 7-speed dual clutch transmission. These are found in several BMWs, namely the F80 M3, F82 M4, and F87 M2. They're all the same transmission. Those are just the different chassis you could find them in. This is out of a 2018 M2, but it's the same as one that would be in an M3 or M4. And like I alluded to in the title and thumbnail of this video, I really think that this is the perfect Pro Touring transmission. When you think back to the essence of what Pro Touring is all about, it's all about taking an old muscle car and then strategically implementing modifications to the drivetrain, suspension, and really all across the car, and making it comfortable on long road trips, but also something that you could drive to and from the track and turn respectable lap times in. And I think that's what dual clutch transmissions are all about. Like I talked about in the intro of this video, sequential transmissions are pretty much the best, bar none, when it comes to on-track performance, but they're brutal on the street. And then alternatively, conventional automatics and things like T56 Magnum, like what used to be in this car, are really great for the street, but they leave a bit of performance to be desired on track. And I think just because of the nature of these transmissions, it gives you the best of both worlds. And you even see this in OEMs in the modern day. If you go buy a C8 Corvette off the showroom floor, well, it comes with a DCT standard, because even manufacturers like GM see the value in a transmission like this. The fact that you can have full manual control over this with paddles, adjust the shift firmness, so you can go out on track, have those super fast upshifts and downshifts, and it takes care of ignition cut on upshifts and the rev match on downshifts, so you can just focus on driving. You're not losing any time to having to heel toe or manually shift, but then you can also just put it in drive, change the shift firmness, and go cruising on the street. Really makes it the best of both worlds, and that's why we're so excited to do this swap, because it is going to give us that incredible dynamic, and it's going to give us more performance on track, which is really what I mostly care about, but it's also going to give us a lot more street ability than we had with the T56 and the super aggressive clutch setup. Now, something like this isn't the most straightforward or simple swap in the world. There's a reason that pretty much no one has done this in a muscle car, and to my knowledge, no one has done this in a muscle car and then gone and raced it. We're going to be the first ones, but it's not impossible. So we're really excited to get started with this swap, and we want to tell you guys a little bit about what needs to get done to actually implement this in the car and get it racing. Now, perhaps the most obvious question you're asking yourself is, how are we even going to mate this up to the engine and get it in the car? This is meant to go behind a BMW inline 6, and that's quite a bit different from the LS7 that we run in the car. Well, the short answer is that there's an awesome company out there called DomiWorks, and they already make the parts to do this swap. Now, when I started looking into doing this trans swap, I already wanted to see what parts were out there. Things like fabricating up a trans cross member is kind of given in doing a swap like this, and that's not a big deal. We can knock that out. But once you start getting into stuff like adapter hubs to take the input shaft to the crank, things like that, you know, I started to get a little more leery. So that's when I wanted to see, okay, does someone already have this? Is there a well thought out product out there? And much to my surprise, there already was. When I Googled it, DomiWorks was the first brand that popped up. And so I looked through their catalog and I was blown away. They make adapter kits to put this transmission behind pretty much whatever engine you can think of. And so I reached out to them, and ultimately they're a partner in doing the swap, which we are very excited about. They do a lot of high-end automotive engineering, but this swap is really one of their specialties, so it's awesome to work with a company that's been there and done that with these transmissions. They know the swap well, and they make really high-end components to do it. So the kit we're using from them has the billet aluminum adapter plate, so they'll take this trans from the BMW bolt pattern to the bolt pattern on the LS, and then it'll also join the engine to the input shaft, because obviously we need to connect them somehow. Now DomiWorks has two different options for doing this. They have a billet steel adapter hub that'll go straight from the crank on the LS, and you have to convert it to a flex plate as part of the swap, and then it'll go to the input shaft of the trans. Or the other kit they have, which is the one we're using, is a torsional damper to join the two. So we're really excited to welcome on DomiWorks as a partner to do this swap, and also a build partner for the car. And we're really excited to put their products on this and just take care of that aspect, because that was one of the big worries, is how are we getting this bolted up to the trans, and also how are we controlling this? So thanks to DomiWorks, we have this taken care of, so we can get it into the car and mock everything up and actually get it fastened in the chassis. So now let's talk a little bit about how we're actually going to control this transmission once it's installed. Now, probably the most daunting part of doing this swap is the electronics and control side, because how do you take a transmission that comes in a modern sports car with its own CAN bus networks and tens of different control modules and hundreds of sensors, and then slap that in a muscle car that has pretty much none of that stuff? Well, the short answer is there is no short answer. You're going to have to implement some electronics and sensors. There's kind of a minimum threshold you have to hit to even get the trans to operate, so there's really no two ways around it. Starting at the transmission itself, ultimately we need something to interface with and control the trans itself and control the brains that are inside of it. You need something that controls line pressure, what gear it's in, just to actually operate the trans. And that was really the big turn from doing the swap for me in years past. I've known about this swap for probably 3 or 4 years now. Andy Smedegaard, who's a well-known racer and car builder, has done this swap in a car called Super K, and they've had awesome success with it. I think they did that swap in, might have been 2021, and that car has won King of the Mountain 2.0. It's done one lap of America. It's done all these incredible things, and it showed how viable this trans can be in racing scenarios. So it's been on my radar since then. But looking into the swap, when it got to the electronic side, is what always would put me off from doing it. Specifically, in years past with the aftermarket transmission control units, or TCUs, you'd have to open up the transmissions to access what's called the mechatronics unit. And so you have to go in there, cut wires, unsolder, replace circuit boards, resolder things together. And that kind of was off-putting to me. I can do very basic automotive wiring, but I don't trust myself to do really critical wiring like that. I grenade the engine and transmission in this thing enough without problems like that, so I didn't really want to add more ingredients and create a recipe for disaster. So that was really the big thing that I was like, as long as I have to do that, I really don't want to. I'm kind of hesitant to do the swap. I was like, maybe I could send it off to someone like Andy Smedegaard, who offers that as a service through Shop ASM. But it just adds to the cost, and then there is always, no matter who does the work or how good it is, right, there's always that worry of what if the aftermarket wiring fails in some capacity. But when I went to look into the swap this most recent time, I had found a product in a company that kind of changed everything, and that's a company called CANformance, and their product, the CAN TCU, or Transmission Control Unit. And we are very excited to also welcome them on as another partner in doing this swap, as well as a partner for the car. Now, they offer the TCU that interfaces directly with the trans, but it utilizes all the factory electronics. So now all of a sudden you don't have to open up the trans, you don't have to touch any of the wiring, you can just plug it straight into the trans and it takes care of it. And really that product is single-handedly the reason we're doing this swap now. When I looked into the swap most recently and I'd found all the DomiWorks stuff, I said, great, we have the way to bolt this up to the engine, get it in the car. And on the control side, when I started looking, I'd seen some of the products that had been out there in years past, But then I saw this Canformance product, and I was reading through it. I was reading through the wiki they have, talking about how to set it up, what it works with, what it does, its general operation, and I was absolutely blown away. This was exactly what I was looking for, and I think this can be pretty revolutionary for doing the swap between Canformance and DomiWorks. They really have pretty much everything you need to be able to integrate this in the car and have a functioning transmission in unique applications like this. You don't have to open up the trans and resolder it. They take care of all the hard work for you, and it makes life so much easier. Now with the Can TCU, we can run it into the trans. You can run a factory style BMW shifter. You can run paddles in it. You can run Can keypads, which is what we're gonna be doing. We're gonna run a push button Can keypad for fundamental gear selections like park, reverse, neutral, drive, and then controlling shift firmness. And then we're actually gonna be running paddles from DomiWorks on the steering wheel so we can put it in manual mode and have full paddle control. Now, that's the transmission operation taken care of, but you also have to integrate it with engine function, because with a dual clutch transmission, like a sequential, you need ignition cuts on the upshifts, and then you also need throttle blips so it can rev match on the downshifts. Now, that's more on the ECU side than the TCU side. The Canformance Can TCU will send the signal to the ECU, but also ultimately you need the ECU to be able to do something with those signals that it receives to cut the ignition or blip the throttle. And for those of you who are familiar with Holley ECUs, that's unfortunately not something Holley can do, so that's something we're going to have to move away from. So we're going to be taking the Holley Terminator X-Max out of the car. It's been awesome. There's no problems with it. I still really enjoy Holley products. I've known them for years. I'm super comfortable with them, and they make an awesome product for what it is. But once you start getting into the higher level stuff like this, it's not really the best option. So we're not going to talk about what ECU we're going to just yet. I'll leave you guys in a little suspense, and I'll reveal it in a future video. But we are moving off Holley, and we're going towards more of a motorsports grade ECU that can help work together with the TCU to make this trans really well integrated and functional, but also gives us a ton more features that we want to use that we'll talk about in future videos. Now, as far as other core sensors that we're going to have to add to the car to get this operational, really the other big one is going to be front and rear wheel speed sensors. The trans needs to see front and rear, so that's something we have to integrate. Now on the rear, it's going to be pretty simple. We have the Miller-built floater kit on the rear, which actually uses a Corvette hub. So that's simple enough. We can just swap the hub that's out on the rear for another Corvette hub that has a wheel speed sensor, so we can get the rear wheel speed signals. But then on the front, obviously, there's not really provision for a Corvette wheel speed sensor or hub, but that is, we have a solution to that, and it's one of our upcoming Gorman Performance Engineering products that I'm not going to talk too much about now, but we will be announcing in the near future. So I'm really excited to tell you guys about that, and you'll see it used firsthand on the car and in the swap. So that really covers all of the electronic side. Like I said, we're really excited to work with these companies. We think that it's so cool that they are pushing the automotive aftermarket forward, and we're able to see this bleed of technology down from modern sports cars to a muscle car. It's so cool to think that if you go to a Chevrolet dealer and buy a C8 Z06, kind of the pinnacle of modern performance sports cars, that you can now take what is functionally the same trans and then stick it in your own project car and reap the same benefits. So huge thank you to DomiWorks and Canformance for coming on as partners. We are super grateful and fortunate to work with them. Without them, the swap wouldn't be possible. And we highly suggest you guys check them out. We are going to be really the first ones to do this in a muscle car and race with it. To our knowledge, we don't know of anyone else doing this with a muscle car. So we're going to be the ones to hopefully help popularize this. As I said in the beginning of this video, I really think this is the perfect pro touring transmission. It's going to give us all the on-track performance that we could ever want, but also more streetability. When I did the LS7 swap and I updated the clutch and whatnot for that swap, really the car became undrivable on the street. The clutch that I was running in it was super lightweight, super grabby, which I knew going into it. And it was awesome for on-track performance, but it became brutal to drive on the street. This car maybe saw 150 miles somewhere in there on the street last year, so I kind of miss being able to hop in it and just drive it, but still have that on-track performance. Ultimately, that's the #1 priority, is to make this car as fast as possible. We really are trying to build the world's fastest pro touring muscle car, so that comes above all else. But we do want to still have some streetability. In the future, we do want to do some events like Autocross Week, One Lap of America, things like that. So that we need to have somewhat of a streetability factor there. We can't just have this be a brutal race car that cannot survive on the street at all. You know, plus I still like to take this thing for cruises now and then. And we really think this is the perfect trans to do both those. So we're really excited to share this with you guys. This is one of the experimental changes that I had talked about in my previous video, where we weren't really planning to do this swap. This wasn't on the original winter plans list, but as we looked into this swap and we saw these new products out there, specifically the CanFormance CAN TCU, this became really, really appealing, and we said, hey, you know what? The car's already stripped down. There's really not that much more that needs to be done to integrate this in the car. So we think this can be pretty game changing for muscle cars, and we can't wait to share this process with you guys. So this will be yet another series we're doing on top of all the other updates that we have coming to the car. And yeah, we really think we're gonna help revolutionize what pro touring muscle cars are and reset the benchmark for what they can do. And we can't wait to share that with you guys. So we'll see you in the next one.